Hi, how you doing? I'm going to start not by apologising for having failed to publish a video for a while, but by explaining and asking you to do something for me. If you follow my Instagram, you likely already know this, but 2 weeks ago, my 12-year-old son was rushed into hospital with a dangerously high blood sugar. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. We had no idea. He's fine now. We've had to make some fairly significant changes to how we are as a family, to how we live, but we can do that, and we were lucky enough to catch it before it did any serious damage. So if you have kids, please check out the link in the description and make sure you know what the signs and symptoms of undiagnosed diabetes are. Anyway, that aside, let's talk about how Matt Easton from Schola Gladiatoria is wrong. Matt recently posted a video replying to Armchair Violence's video on why HEMA will never be as big as MMA. And it pains me to admit it, but in a lot of ways he's exactly right. People do struggle to identify with weapons-based combat, and there's a clear disconnect between what a sword will actually do to a person and how we use them when competing. When we strap on armour and use blunt swords, we aren't actually replicating sword fighting. We're replicating stick fighting. We treat a supposedly sharp sword as if it was simply a club, because as he rightly points out, sports fencing, which does treat weapons as if they're sharp, is ridiculously fast, difficult to follow, and not particularly entertaining to watch. However, there are a couple of things he mentions that I think he hasn't got quite right, and I'm not going to let an opportunity to make them public pass me by. Matt says that the fact that we have to essentially create an analogue for killing someone with a blade, we have a judge who calls the hit as being a killing blow, creates a disconnect that doesn't exist in unarmed combat sports, that makes it harder for people to identify with the fight.
In boxing, you exchange blows. Bam, you get hit. You know, like Rocky, if you're Rocky, you get hit loads and loads of times, but you come back fighting, okay? And you still win the fight. It's completely understandable and relatable, and you can see the effects of the blows. We can't see the effects of the blows or the stabs or whatever with weapons without using actual real weapons. So long as we've got blunt weapons, so long as we've got safety equipment, which we have to have, you can't see the effect of the blows. Therefore, a casual audience doesn't know how to interpret what they're seeing. When you kick someone, they get shoved backwards. When you throw someone, they fall on the floor. When you punch someone, they reel back. Because these are real attacks. The problem is the attacks we do with blunt, flexible swords and spears and other weapons in protective equipment aren't real attacks. So they're very difficult to interpret by the audience.
I disagree. Yes, in pure boxing, a knockout is a knockout. The same with the striking aspects of MMA. But often, fights are won on points, not knockouts. And these are essentially down to the opinion of a bunch of guys watching. They aren't objective in any way, and we don't get to see those points until the end of the fight. What we see might not be what they see. And yet boxing still survives. On top of that though, submissions in grappling or MMA and pins in wrestling are exactly that same analogue. A submission isn't a visually obvious thing. Often you have to watch a fight back several times to see what happened. Not always, but definitely sometimes. But someone tapping you on the shoulder isn't a spectacular ending to a fight, like a knockout. It isn't a broken limb or an unconscious fighter who's just been strangled. It's a stand-in that we've all accepted represents the win. The same with the pin in wrestling. Pinning someone doesn't end a real fight. It's simply a representation of the fact that you've immobilised someone in a way that we can all agree likely means you would have won, were this actually a real fight, either on a Saturday night in town with your mates, or on a battlefield several hundred years ago. The same with throwing someone to the ground in close-grip wrestling systems. It doesn't win you the fight, but we've accepted that it represents winning, so we're happy with that. So there's no reason that a judge calling a hit in HEMA can't work in exactly the same way as a judge pulling a pair of fighters apart because that judge considers the choke to have been successfully applied. I'd also argue that people who practice grappling are often very happy to watch it.
Also, there's an interesting point that BJJ people don't watch BJJ tournaments because they're boring.
It isn't boring once you understand what it is you're seeing, and there are indeed big personalities with big followings. People like Gary Tonnen. Whether you watch him to see him win because you love him, or to see him lose because you hate him, you still watch him. Gordon Ryan handing a prediction to the judges of how he's going to win keeps people glued to the fight. And, winning is kind of his thing at the moment. The difference, in my opinion, between HEMA and combat sports like boxing, MMA, or BJJ is simple. It's money. HEMA is, and always has been, done on the cheap. Yes, if you've been doing it a while, you may spend a few £100 on a sword, but I'm a no-gi guy by preference, and I've got 300 or 400 quid's worth of gis. Let's not get started on rash guards. Training in BJJ is expensive as martial arts go, and the culture makes it clear that you should be training as often as you possibly can. You need gear, lots of it. You need to pay your often quite expensive membership fees. A decent instructor with a range of classes can easily make a pretty good living. If you have a large academy with multiple classes a day, you can do very well for yourself. That simply isn't possible in HEMA. People aren't willing to spend money on it, and so equally, sponsors, promoters, event organisers aren't going to spend money either. Until someone is willing to throw a good amount of money into marketing and running a top-level HEMA competition, it's never going to be successful. Until people are willing to pay to watch and bet on HEMA fighters, no major organisation is going to be willing to stump up the money to make it happen. Until you can make money from it, no one's going to spend money on it. And until someone spends money on it, it'll never be big. So, over to you. Am I right? Or have I missed the point? Stick something in the comments, let me know. And if you have kids, don't forget to follow that link in the description. Fight team!